Why was the dog frozen? That's what everyone was asking on the live fire range that morning. 40 military personnel seated in the observer bleachers watching as gunfire cracked through the air. M4 rifles barking downrange at 200 yards, but it wasn't the weapons that made them freeze. It was Captain Floyd Kingsley's voice, amplified through the loudspeaker system, cutting through the smoke like a blade. "Donovan, what in God's name is this?" She stood in the center of it all, 5'3", 115 pounds. Hazel Donovan looked like a strong breeze might carry her away. Beside her, Duke trembled. An 80-pound German shepherd with ears pinned flat against his skull, eyes fixed on nothing, seeing everything. His muscles rigid, tail tucked so tight it nearly disappeared. Frozen, completely frozen. From the bleachers, Sergeant Sabira Monroe's laugh carried across the facility with surgical precision. "Told you, little girl playing dress-up shouldn't be here." Hazel said nothing. She simply knelt beside Duke, one hand settling on the dog's back with a gentleness that seemed almost absurd given the chaos of sound and smoke surrounding them. Pop, 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 each gunshot making Duke flinch, each report a reminder of something no one else could see. But in 20 minutes, everything would be different. Kingsley descended from the observation deck, his combat boots striking concrete with the rhythm of judgment. "Handler Donovan, this is the third time this week. 3 times. K-9 instructors cannot have dogs that refuse commands. You're wasting everyone's time here." Behind him, Lieutenant Derek Ambrose shook his head with visible contempt. 30 combat tours stamped into his record, a tactical expert who'd seen it all, or thought he had. "Her gentle approach doesn't work. A dog needs discipline, not a lullaby." Specialist Connor Vale, positioned near the equipment station, made sure his voice carried just far enough. "Heard she got into the program through connections. Someone in Washington pulling strings." But nobody noticed what Hazel was actually doing. Nobody caught the way her fingers moved across Duke's neck in a specific pattern. 3 taps followed by a circular motion. Nobody saw how Duke's eyes, still afraid, had begun tracking her smallest movements with laser focus. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they'd been. The gunfire downrange continued. Pop, 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 each report making Duke flinch. Hazel's hand remained steady, her breathing measured. In her peripheral vision, she could see Monroe leaning forward in the bleachers, arms crossed, face arranged in satisfaction. Kingsley stood 10 feet away, waiting for her to fail completely. "Handler Donovan." Kingsley's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet that preceded dismissals. "Take your animal back to the kennel. Report to my office at 1400 hours. We'll discuss your future in this program." Hazel stood slowly, Duke pressing against her leg. She met Kingsley's eyes for exactly 2 seconds, not long enough to challenge, just enough to acknowledge, then turned toward the kennel facilities. As she walked, her posture held something most people missed, the kind of calm that comes from having survived much worse than public humiliation. Specialist Vale smirked as she passed. "Better pack your bags, Donovan. This isn't a charity program." She kept walking. The kennel area smelled like disinfectant and dog shampoo, a clean military smell that somehow made the isolation feel sharper. Hazel led Duke to his designated space, a 10 by 10 enclosure with a raised bed and water station. The moment the gate closed, Duke's trembling intensified. "I know, buddy." Hazel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I know those sounds." She settled onto the concrete floor beside the enclosure, back against the chain link. Through the window, she could see handlers moving between buildings, their body language loose and confident. The kind of confidence that came from never having bullets actually meant for you. 3 days ago, Duke had frozen for the first time. It had been during a routine exercise. Simulated gunfire, smoke grenades, the standard noise exposure protocol. One moment he'd been tracking a scent trail. The next he'd locked up like his muscles had turned to stone. The training officer had called it stress response failure. Hazel had called it exactly what it was: a combat veteran's body remembering the difference between training and survival. She cleaned Duke's equipment with methodical precision, hands moving through the process with automatic efficiency. Collar inspection, leash check, harness adjustment. Each movement flowed into the next without conscious thought, the kind of muscle memory that takes thousands of repetitions to build. The kennel door opened. Sergeant Monroe filled the frame, arms still crossed, expression arranged somewhere between pity and contempt. "You don't belong here, Donovan." Monroe's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had never been proven wrong. "This isn't a petting zoo. These are working animals for military operations. If you can't handle the pressure, there are civilian dog training programs that might suit you better." Hazel continued wiping down Duke's harness. The leather showed wear in specific places, the kind of wear that didn't come from training exercises. "Are you even listening to me?" "Yes, Sergeant." Hazel's voice stayed level, empty of inflection. Monroe stepped closer, her shadow falling across the equipment spread on the floor. "You know what I think? I think you've never seen real operational work. I think you took some basic handler course and thought it qualified you to work with tactical dogs. Duke isn't a pet project. He's a failed training candidate, and your soft approach is proving it." Hazel set down the harness and stood. The movement was smooth, economical, and for just 2 seconds her posture shifted into something else: weight balanced, shoulders loose, eyes tracking Monroe's center mass. Then she adjusted, settling back into the appearance of a junior instructor trying not to make waves. Monroe caught none of it. 2 days, Donovan. That's all you've got left before Commander Archer pulls the plug on this experiment. After Monroe left, Hazel returned to Duke's enclosure. She knelt eye level with the dog and ran her hand along his shoulder. Under the fur, she could feel the ridge of scar tissue, a gift from an IED blast outside Kandahar, the kind of wound that never fully stopped aching. "We'll get through this," she whispered, "just like we got through everything else." But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. What nobody knew about Hazel Donovan could fill a classified file. And it did. The briefing room at 0900 hours the next morning felt deliberately cold. Hazel arrived 3 minutes early and took a seat in the back row, Duke at her side in a perfect heel position. Around her, 12 other handlers filled the space, their conversation stopping when she entered, then resuming at a lower volume. Captain Kingsley entered without preamble, a tablet in one hand and the weight of institutional authority in his bearing. "Listen up. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." He tapped the tablet, and a schedule appeared on the wall screen behind him. "Handler Donovan, you're listed here for a disciplinary hearing in 48 hours. The purpose of this hearing is to evaluate whether you and your K-9 candidate should remain in the instructor program." Hazel's expression didn't change. Duke's ears rotated toward Kingsley's voice, but the dog remained motionless. "Additionally," Kingsley continued, "Lieutenant Ambrose will be conducting a practical evaluation before the hearing. Handler Donovan, you'll demonstrate your technical competency in K-9 tactical operations. The evaluation will be observed by senior staff." Lieutenant Ambrose stood from his position along the sidewall, lean and hard. "The evaluation will be comprehensive: building clearance, explosive detection, handler commands under stress. If your dog freezes again, we're done here." Hazel nodded once. "Understood, sir." After the briefing, she walked Duke to the outdoor training area. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and diesel fuel. She could feel eyes on her from multiple directions, handlers watching from the equipment shed, support staff pretending not to stare from the maintenance building. She knelt beside Duke, running her hands along his sides, checking for tension points. "Hey." The voice came from behind her. Hazel turned to find a handler she recognized but didn't know. Young, maybe 25, corporal stripes on his sleeve. "I'm Hastings," he said. "I wanted to say something before the evaluation." Hazel waited. "My partner, Ranger, he came back from deployment last year, started having the same freezing episodes. Command wanted to retire him, said he was done." Hastings glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I watched what you did with Duke yesterday on the range. The way you touched him, that pattern on his neck. I tried it with Ranger. And he responded. First time in months he didn't lock up during gunfire simulation." Hastings met her eyes. "I don't know who you are or where you learned that, but it works. So whatever happens in your evaluation, just know someone's paying attention." He walked away before she could respond. Hazel looked down at Duke, who was watching her with those intelligent brown eyes. "Looks like we're not as invisible as they think." The evaluation was scheduled for 1400 hours. Hazel spent the morning running Duke through basic drills. Nothing strenuous, just reinforcement, building confidence. By noon, Duke was moving with purpose, his anxiety levels manageable. At 13:30, she reported to the evaluation staging area. The setup was extensive. A mock building structure, explosive training aids hidden throughout, simulated hostile actors, and noise, lots of noise, recorded gunfire, shouting, vehicle engines. Everything designed to create chaos and test operational readiness. Lieutenant Ambrose stood with a clipboard, Captain Kingsley beside him. Sergeant Monroe was there too, along with a dozen other senior personnel. All watching, all waiting for failure. "Handler Donovan," Ambrose began, "you'll have 30 minutes to complete the scenario. Building clearance. Locate 3 explosive devices. Apprehend 1 hostile actor. Your dog must respond to verbal commands and demonstrate stress resilience. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Begin on my mark." Hazel checked Duke's equipment one final time. Harness secure, collar properly fitted. Then she placed her hand on his head, leaning close enough to whisper, "Just like before, buddy, just like we trained." The recorded gunfire started, loud, sudden, overwhelming. Duke flinched, his muscles tensed. For a moment it looked like he might freeze again. But Hazel's hand moved to his neck. 3 taps, circular motion. Duke's eyes locked onto hers. "Mark," Ambrose called. They moved. Hazel entered the mock building with Duke at her left side, maintaining perfect tactical spacing. The layout was standard. Narrow corridor leading to multiple rooms. Corners that could conceal threats. Duke's nose worked constantly, processing scents, filtering information. First room clear. Duke indicated nothing. Second room, Duke's posture changed. Ears forward, body tensing in a specific way. "Alert," Hazel called out. She moved to where Duke indicated. Behind a stack of boxes, an explosive training aid, bright orange, clearly marked. "First device located," someone announced over the speaker system. They continued. The gunfire recordings grew louder, voices shouting, vehicle noises. Duke flinched with each burst but never froze, never stopped working. Third room, Duke alerted again, another device behind a false panel. Second device located. Hazel could hear murmuring from the observation area. She ignored it, focused on Duke, on the mission, on proving what she already knew. Fourth room, this one was different, a person inside, the hostile actor scenario. Duke's body language shifted immediately, not aggressive, not fearful, alert, ready. "Show me," Hazel whispered. Duke moved toward the corner where a training volunteer crouched, playing the role of hostile. Duke positioned himself between Hazel and the threat, maintaining distance, maintaining control. "Hostile located and contained," Hazel announced. The final device was in the back room, hidden beneath a tarp. Duke found it in under 30 seconds. Third device located, scenario complete. Hazel called Duke back to her side, checked him over. His breathing was elevated but controlled. No signs of shutdown, no freezing, just a working dog doing his job. She walked out of the mock building expecting silence. Instead, she found something else entirely. Why was everyone staring at the stopwatch? Lieutenant Ambrose held it up, looking at the numbers like they'd been written in a language he didn't understand. 16 minutes, 42 seconds. His voice was flat. That's the fastest completion time we've recorded in this facility. Captain Kingsley stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Handler Donovan, explain your methodology. Specifically, the hand signals you used with your K9. Hazel stood at attention, Duke sitting calmly at her side. Around them, the senior personnel had moved closer, forming a loose semicircle. The murmuring had stopped. Now there was just silence and attention. Sir, Duke responds to trauma-informed handling techniques. The hand signals are pressure point stimulation combined with pattern recognition. It helps him differentiate between operational stress and genuine threat. Trauma-informed, Monroe repeated, her voice carrying skepticism. That's not in any K9 training manual I've read. No, Sergeant, it's not. Kingsley's eyes narrowed. Where did you learn these techniques? This was the moment. The question she'd been avoiding since the day she arrived at this facility under a name that wasn't quite hers and credentials that didn't tell the whole story. Hazel met Kingsley's gaze. Kandahar Province, sir, 2014 through 2016. I was a K9 handler attached to Special Operations. Duke was my partner. The silence that followed was absolute. Ambrose spoke first. Your service record says you're a new handler, recent training, no deployment history. My service record reflects my current position, sir, not my previous service. Previous service under what name? Warrant Officer Elena Martinez, sir, 3rd Special Operations Group. I was medically discharged in 2016 following an IED incident that injured both Duke and myself. Monroe's face had gone pale. Martinez, the ghost handler. Hazel said nothing. There were stories, Monroe continued, her voice quieter now, about a handler in Afghanistan who could work dogs in conditions that would break most animals, urban combat, building clearances under fire. They said she could communicate with her K9 without speaking, that she'd been in over 40 hot operations and her dog never failed a single mission. 43 operations, Sergeant, not 40. Kingsley's expression had shifted from authority to something more complex, respect mixed with confusion. If you're who you say you are, why hide it? Why come back under a different name? Because when I applied to this program under my real credentials, I was rejected, sir. The review board said my methods were unconventional, that my injury history made me a liability, that Duke's combat trauma made him unsuitable for training work. Hazel's voice remained level, but something harder had entered it. So I came back a different way, under a name that wouldn't trigger automatic rejection, to prove that combat-traumatized K9s aren't failed candidates. They're experienced veterans who need different handling. Ambrose was reading something on his tablet, his expression growing more intense with each swipe. I'm looking at classified after-action reports from Kandahar, Operation Silent Thunder, Operation Phantom Reach. Your name appears in 7 separate commendations, 4 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts. The medals are in storage, sir. Duke's the one who earned them. This is impossible, Monroe said, but her voice had lost its certainty. The ghost handler was a legend, someone people talked about but never met. You can't be her. Legends are just stories people tell when they can't accept the truth, Sergeant. The truth is simpler. I'm a handler who learned to work with traumatized K9s because my partner and I went through hell together. And when we came home, I watched the military throw away dozens of dogs like Duke because they didn't understand what they were seeing. Hazel looked down at Duke, who was watching the proceedings with calm intelligence. Duke saved my life 11 times in combat. When he froze on that IED, when he sensed the danger before I did, he took the blast meant for me, lost hearing in his left ear, developed trauma responses that made him unsuitable for service. She looked back up at the assembled personnel. So I learned how to help him heal, and then I came back here to teach others how to do the same. Because warriors like Duke deserve better than being discarded. The silence stretched. Then Kingsley spoke, his voice careful. Warrant Officer Martinez or Donovan or whoever you actually are, you falsified credentials to gain access to this facility. That's a serious violation. Yes, sir. You concealed your identity and service record. Yes, sir. And you did it knowing full well you could face court-martial if discovered. I did, sir. Kingsley looked at Ambrose, then at Monroe, then back to Hazel. Why? Because doing the right thing sometimes means breaking the rules, sir. Because Duke and dogs like him fought for us. And I wasn't going to let bureaucracy be the reason they suffered. Ambrose set down his tablet. When he spoke, his voice had changed. I was in Kandahar in 2015, second deployment. I heard about the Ghost Handler, about a K-9 team that cleared a building complex single-handedly while we were pinned down outside. Saved 16 soldiers that day. 14 soldiers and 2 contractors, Hazel corrected quietly. And it wasn't single-handed. It was me and Duke, always both of us. I was one of those 14 soldiers. The air seemed to leave the room. Ambrose stepped closer, his eyes searching Hazel's face. I never saw you, never knew your name, just heard the stories afterward. They said the handler moved like smoke, that her dog could detect threats through concrete walls, that she pulled off what should have been impossible. Duke detected threats because his hearing is exceptional, sir. I moved carefully because I didn't want to die, and nothing about that day was impossible. It was just necessary. You saved my life. Duke saved your life, sir. I was just his partner. Monroe spoke up, her voice strained. If this is true, if you're really the ghost handler, why not reveal that from the start? You could have walked in here with full authority. Instead, you let us mock you. Let us treat you like an incompetent rookie. Hazel turned to face Monroe directly. Because, Sergeant, the moment I revealed my background, everything I said about trauma-informed handling would have been dismissed as special operator elitism. You would have said my methods only work because I'm exceptional, not because the methods themselves are sound. By proving Duke's rehabilitation as a failed handler with a failed dog, I proved the methods work for anyone willing to learn them. She paused, then added more softly, and because I needed to see who would actually care about the dogs, who would look past rank and reputation to focus on what matters. Duke and I have been watching. We've been learning who's in this job to help animals and who's in it for ego. Hastings had appeared at the edge of the group, Ranger at his side. She helped me, he said quietly. After you walked away yesterday, I found her at the kennels. She spent 2 hours teaching me techniques to help Ranger. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't make it about credentials. Just wanted to help the dog. There are 7 other handlers in this facility, Hazel continued, working with K-9s labeled as failures. Dogs with combat trauma, stress disorders, behavioral issues. I've been teaching them quietly the same techniques I used with Duke. And those dogs are improving, not because I'm special, but because the approach works. Kingsley rubbed his jaw, processing. This creates a complicated situation. You've violated protocols, but you've also demonstrated exceptional competency. You've concealed your identity, but apparently for legitimate reasons. And you've achieved results that frankly make our current program look inadequate. The program isn't inadequate, sir. It's just incomplete. These dogs need different handling for their specific trauma. The traditional approach works fine for non-combat K-9s, but for veterans like Duke, we need specialized protocols. Protocols you're willing to teach. That's why I'm here, sir. Ambrose looked at Kingsley. "Sir, with respect, I think we're looking at this wrong. Yes, she broke rules, but she also just completed our toughest evaluation faster than anyone on record, with a dog we'd labeled as hopeless. That's not a violation, that's an opportunity." Monroe had been quiet, but now she spoke. "I owe you an apology, warrant officer. I made assumptions, said things that were cruel and unfounded." "No apology necessary, Sergeant. You were doing your job as you understood it, but maybe now you understand it differently." The group began to disperse, conversations erupting in small clusters. Hazel felt the weight of revelation settling. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. The question now was whether exposure meant opportunity or ending. Kingsley approached her privately, voice lowered. "The disciplinary hearing is still scheduled, but I'm changing its purpose. Instead of evaluating whether you should stay, we're going to evaluate how to implement your methods across the entire K-9 program. Can you have protocols documented by tomorrow?" "I can have them ready in 4 hours, sir." "Then do it, and warrant officer, welcome back to active service, properly this time." As Hazel walked Duke back to the kennels, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with purpose. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time she wasn't fighting alone. What happens when a ghost becomes real? That was the question hanging over the facility for the next 72 hours. Hazel's revelation had spread through the base like wildfire. The ghost handler wasn't a legend. She was real. She was here. And she just dismantled every assumption about combat-traumatized K-9s. The disciplinary hearing had been converted into something else entirely: a program review, an opportunity assessment, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. Hazel stood in the conference room, Duke at her side, facing a panel of senior officers she'd never met. Colonel Sarah Rhodes, Major General Vincent Archer, Command Sergeant Major Patricia Sterling, and 3 other high-ranking personnel whose presence suggested this was bigger than a simple facility review. Colonel Rhodes spoke first. "Warrant Officer Martinez, we've reviewed your service record, the real one. We've also examined the protocols you submitted, 23 pages of trauma-informed K-9 handling techniques, comprehensive, well-documented, scientifically grounded." "Thank you, ma'am. But here's what I want to understand." Rhodes leaned forward. "You walked away from one of the most decorated K-9 handler careers in special operations history. You were medically discharged with honors, full benefits. You could have retired quietly. Instead, you came back under false pretenses, risked court-martial, and subjected yourself to public humiliation. Why?" Hazel glanced down at Duke, who was resting calmly despite the tension in the room. "Because, ma'am, I couldn't watch them destroy dogs like Duke. I couldn't stand by while combat veterans were labeled as failures and discarded. If I'd come back as myself with my credentials, the system would have politely thanked me and ignored everything I said. Change doesn't happen from the top down in military culture. It happens when someone proves the old way is broken." General Archer spoke up, his voice gravelly with age and authority. "That's a bold statement, warrant officer. You're suggesting our K-9 program is broken." "Not broken, sir. Incomplete. The current approach works perfectly well for dogs without combat trauma, but we're bringing back hundreds of K-9s from active deployment zones, dogs with PTSD, anxiety disorders, hypervigilance, sound sensitivity. And we're treating them with the same protocols we use for domestic police K-9s. It doesn't work." "According to your data," Sterling said, reviewing a tablet, 78% of combat-traumatized K-9s are being retired or euthanized within 6 months of returning stateside. "That's correct, Sergeant Major, and it's unnecessary. Most of those dogs can be rehabilitated with proper trauma-informed handling. Duke is proof. 3 months ago, he was on the retirement list, labeled as too damaged for service. Now he's completing tactical evaluations faster than active K-9s with no trauma history." Rhodes tapped her fingers on the table. Let's talk specifics. Your protocols involve what you call pressure point stimulation and pattern recognition. Explain that in terms we can implement. Hazel had prepared for this. It's based on neurological research about how traumatized brains process threat signals. Combat K9s develop hypervigilance. Every loud noise becomes a potential IED. Every sudden movement becomes a possible hostile. Their nervous systems are stuck in survival mode. She moved her hand to Duke's neck, demonstrating the technique. Specific pressure points, when stimulated in recognizable patterns, activate the parasympathetic nervous system. It's the body's natural calming mechanism. By pairing these touch patterns with positive experiences during training, we create new neural pathways. The dog learns to differentiate between genuine threats and environmental noise. And this works consistently, Archer asked. Duke isn't my only success, sir. Over the past 2 months, I've been working quietly with 7 other handlers in this facility. Their K9s showed similar trauma responses. All 7 dogs have demonstrated significant improvement. 4 are now cleared for operational return. 2 are still in rehabilitation. 1 was adopted by his handler for retirement, but without behavioral issues that would have previously required euthanasia. Sterling looked up from her tablet. That's an 86% success rate. 86% so far, Sergeant Major. With expanded resources and proper training for handlers, I believe we can push that higher. Rhodes exchanged glances with Archer. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then Rhodes spoke. Warrant Officer, we're prepared to offer you something unprecedented. A pilot program, 6 months, full funding. You'll have authority to implement your protocols with every combat traumatized K9 in this facility. You'll train handlers, document results, and prove whether your methods scale beyond individual cases. Hazel felt her chest tighten. This was it. The opportunity she'd sacrificed everything to create, but there was a catch. There was always a catch. What's the condition, ma'am? Complete transparency. No more ghost handler mystique. No more operating in shadows. You'll work under your real identity, full accountability. Every decision, every outcome documented and reviewed. If this works, we expand it military-wide. If it fails, we're done. No second chances. And my falsified credentials. Overlooked, Archer said, his voice carrying finality. Given the circumstances and the results you've achieved, but going forward you operate by the book. Understand? Yes, sir. Rhodes stood, extending her hand. Then welcome aboard, Warrant Officer Martinez. You've got 6 months to change military K9 policy. Don't waste them. The handshake was firm, professional, but Hazel could feel the weight of expectation in it, the pressure of institutional eyes watching every move. As the panel members filed out, Sterling lingered. A word of warning, Warrant Officer. You've made believers out of us, but not everyone in this facility is convinced. There are handlers who have built careers on the old methods. They're going to resist. They're going to test you, and they're going to wait for you to fail. I understand, Sergeant Major. Do you? Because this isn't combat. You can't just outperform them and prove dominance. You have to win hearts and minds. You have to change culture. That's harder than any tactical operation. Hazel looked down at Duke, then back to Sterling. Sergeant Major, I've been underestimated my entire career. I've operated in environments where failure meant death. This facility is challenging, but it's not Kandahar. I can handle resistance. Sterling smiled slightly. I believe you can. Just remember, even ghost handlers need allies. Don't try to do this alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Hazel transformed a storage building into what she called the Rehabilitation Center. Equipment donated from various sources, training aids, quiet spaces, observation areas where handlers could learn without interfering. She recruited Hastings as her primary assistant. Corporal Hastings had proven himself capable, dedicated, and importantly, willing to admit when he didn't know something. His K-9 Ranger became the program's second documented success story. Sergeant Monroe had been surprisingly cooperative. After the revelation, something had shifted in her demeanor. She attended every training session, asked detailed questions, took extensive notes, and one afternoon she'd approached Hazel privately. "I was wrong about you," Monroe said without preamble. "Everything I said on that range, everything I assumed, I was wrong, and I want to learn your methods, not because I'm ordered to, but because I owe it to the dogs." Hazel had accepted without hesitation. Monroe's conversion from skeptic to advocate carried weight. Other handlers noticed. Attitudes began to shift. But Sterling had been right. Not everyone was convinced. Lieutenant Ambrose observed from a distance, neither supporting nor opposing. His silence felt deliberate, calculated. Hazel couldn't tell if he was waiting for her to succeed or waiting for her to fail. And then there was Captain Kingsley. He'd authorized the program, provided resources, but his interactions with Hazel remained formal, distant, like he was keeping professional space between himself and something he didn't fully trust. 4 weeks into the pilot program, disaster struck. A K-9 named Atlas, a Belgian Malinois with severe combat trauma, had been brought into the rehabilitation program. His handler, Specialist Reed, was young, eager, and convinced Hazel's methods would work miracles. During a routine exposure therapy session, Atlas snapped. Something triggered him, a door slamming, a car backfiring outside. No one knew exactly what, but Atlas went from calm to aggressive in seconds. He lunged at another K-9, a training dog that had wandered too close. Reed tried to intervene. Atlas redirected onto him, bit his forearm, drew blood. The incident was contained within minutes. Reed's injury was minor. Atlas was secured without further incident, but the damage was done. Word spread instantly. The ghost handler's methods had failed. A dog in her program had attacked a handler. The whispers started immediately. Kingsley called her to his office that evening. His expression was grave. "I've had 3 calls from senior command," he said without preamble. "They're concerned. They're questioning whether this program is viable. General Archer wants a full incident report. Colonel Rhodes wants to know if we should suspend operations." Hazel stood at attention, Duke beside her. "Sir, what happened with Atlas was a setback, not a failure. Combat trauma doesn't have a linear recovery path. There will be incidents. There will be challenges. That doesn't mean the approach is wrong. A handler was injured, warrant officer. That's not a challenge. That's a liability. Specialist Reed is fine, sir. 5 stitches. Back to duty tomorrow. He's already requested to continue working with Atlas." "That's admirable but irrelevant. The optics are bad. You promised results. You promised these dogs could be rehabilitated safely. Now command sees this incident as evidence your methods are dangerous." Hazel felt the familiar frustration building, the same institutional inertia that had driven her to hide her identity in the first place. "Sir, traditional K-9 programs have injury incidents regularly. Handlers get bitten, dogs get aggressive. It's part of working with animals, but when it happens in those programs, it's called occupational hazard. When it happens in mine, it's called program failure. That's not fair assessment. That's bias." Kingsley sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fair or not, it's reality. You're under more scrutiny because you're proposing something new. Higher standards, greater accountability. You knew that going in." "I did, sir, which is why I'm not giving up. Atlas needs more time. His trauma is deeper than most, but he's made progress. Before entering this program, he couldn't be in the same room as other dogs without aggression. Today's incident was the first in 3 weeks. That's improvement. Improvement that resulted in injury." "Yes, sir, and I take full responsibility. I should have recognized the warning signs earlier. Should have adjusted the exposure therapy timeline. I made mistakes, but those mistakes don't invalidate the entire approach. Kingsley looked at her for a long moment. What do you need? The question surprised her. Sir, you heard me. What do you need to make this work? More time, more resources, different protocols, because despite the incident, I still believe in what you're trying to do. I'm not ready to pull the plug, but I need you to tell me how we move forward from this. Hazel felt Duke lean against her leg. Solid, present, supportive. I need permission to bring in outside expertise, sir. Veterinary behaviorists, trauma specialists, people who understand neurological rehabilitation. The military K-9 program has excellent trainers, but we don't have enough specialists in trauma recovery. If we're serious about helping these dogs, we need to expand our knowledge base. Done. What else? I need time with Atlas, one-on-one. No other handlers, no observers, just me and him working through his specific triggers. That's risky. It's necessary, sir. Atlas attacked because he felt cornered, multiple stimuli overwhelming his ability to cope. If I can isolate variables, control the environment, I can help him build tolerance gradually. But I can't do that with a dozen people watching and judging. Kingsley nodded slowly. You'll have it, but warrant officer, understand this. Another incident, another injury, and I won't be able to protect this program. Command will shut it down, and no amount of good intentions will stop them. I understand, sir. Do you? Because you're not just rehabilitating dogs anymore. You're rehabilitating faith in a new approach, and faith is fragile. One more mistake, and everything you've built collapses. Hazel met his eyes. Then I won't make another mistake, sir. But as she left his office, Duke walking calmly at her side, she couldn't shake the weight of those words. Faith is fragile. One more mistake. She'd survived insurgent bullets, IED blasts, firefights in urban combat zones. But somehow, navigating institutional politics felt more dangerous than any of that. Because in combat, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemies wore the same uniform, and they smiled while waiting for you to fail. How do you save something everyone's decided is already broken? Hazel stood in the observation room watching Atlas through one-way glass. The Belgian Malinois paced his enclosure with measured steps, not frantic, not aggressive, just restless, like a soldier on guard duty who couldn't stand down. It had been 3 days since the incident. 3 days of meetings, reports, and carefully worded explanations to senior command. 3 days of watching her program teeter on the edge of cancellation. Specialist Reed had returned to duty with his arm bandaged and his determination intact. He'd insisted on speaking at the incident review, explaining that he'd made mistakes in handling Atlas's approach distance, that the bite wasn't the dog's fault but his own error in judgment. His testimony had helped, but not enough. The observation room door opened. Hazel turned to find Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinary behaviorist she'd requested from Walter Reed Medical Center. Chen's expertise in trauma neurology was exactly what the program needed. That's Atlas, Chen asked, studying the dog through the glass. That's him, 7 years old, served 3 combat deployments, explosive detection specialist, 11 confirmed saves, 1 handler KIA during his 2nd deployment, developed severe anxiety and aggression after witnessing the death. Chen made notes on her tablet. Classic trauma response. The dog bonded with his handler, watched him die. Now his brain associates human proximity with loss and danger. Every new handler becomes a potential loss. Every interaction triggers hypervigilance. Can he be helped? That's the wrong question, warrant officer. The right question is, can he learn to trust again? And the answer is maybe. Trauma doesn't erase. It just gets managed. What you're trying to do, teaching these dogs to regulate their responses, that's viable. But it requires patience most institutions don't have. Hazel looked back at Atlas. We have 6 months. That's all command is giving us. Then we'd better use them wisely. Chen stepped closer to the glass. I want to try something. It's experimental. Uses biofeedback monitoring combined with gradual exposure. We track Atlas's stress markers in real time, heart rate, cortisol levels, muscle tension, and we adjust interactions based on his physiological responses, not our assumptions about what should work. Equipment. I brought it with me. Portable monitoring system. Non-invasive. If Atlas will tolerate wearing a sensor vest, we can gather data that tells us exactly what triggers him and what calms him. No guesswork, just evidence. Hazel felt something shift, hope maybe, or just relief that someone understood what she was trying to do. When can we start? Now if you're ready, but I need to warn you, this will require you going in there with him. Alone. I'll monitor from here, but you'll be the one building trust. I've done harder things. I know. I read your file. Chen smiled slightly. The real one, ghost handler, that's quite a reputation. Reputation doesn't help dogs, doctor. Only action does. Then let's act. Hazel entered Atlas's enclosure wearing the biofeedback vest designed for human monitoring, but modified to track her own stress responses alongside the dog's. If Atlas could sense her fear, she needed to know when she was broadcasting it. The dog stopped packing when she entered. His eyes locked onto her, calculating, assessing threat level. Hazel sat down on the floor back against the wall, making herself small and non-threatening. She didn't look directly at Atlas, didn't speak, just breathed, slow and measured. Through her earpiece, Chen's voice came quietly. Your heart rate is elevated but steady. Good. Atlas's heart rate just spiked. He's registering your presence as potential threat. Hazel closed her eyes, focused on breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. The pattern she'd learned during her own PTSD treatment after Kandahar. Your cortisol levels dropping, Chen reported. Atlas is watching you, his heart rate coming down slightly. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Hazel remained still, patient, letting Atlas make the choice about proximity. Movement, Chen said. He's approaching, 3 meters, 2.5. Hazel kept her eyes closed, kept breathing. She could hear Atlas's paws on concrete, the sound of his breathing, close now, very close. 1 meter, he's circling you, investigating, don't react. The sound of sniffing, Atlas's nose working, gathering information. Then the sensation of fur brushing against her arm. Atlas had moved close enough to touch. Cortisol spiking in Atlas. He's conflicted, curious but afraid. Hazel slowly extended one hand, palm up, non-threatening, an offering, not a demand. More sniffing, then the gentle pressure of a wet nose against her palm. Contact made, Chen said, excitement creeping into her professional tone. Both your stress markers stabilizing. He's accepting your presence. Hazel opened her eyes slowly. Atlas sat 2 feet away, watching her with those intense Belgian Malinois eyes. Not aggressive, not afraid, just watchful. Hey, buddy, Hazel said softly. I know you're scared, I know you've lost people, but I'm not going anywhere. Atlas's ears twitched, processing her voice, deciding whether words matched intent. Over the next hour, Hazel stayed in the enclosure, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing slowly and moving to different positions, always letting Atlas control the distance, always respecting his need for space. By the end of the session, Atlas had allowed her to touch his shoulder. Brief contact, barely 5 seconds, but it was progress. Chen met her outside the enclosure, tablet full of data. Remarkable. His stress markers showed consistent decrease throughout the session. You've established baseline trust. That's the foundation everything else builds on. How long until he can work with other handlers? Weeks, maybe months. Trauma recovery isn't linear. There will be setbacks, but the data suggests he's capable of rehabilitation. You were right about him. Over the next 3 weeks, Hazel worked with Atlas daily. each session monitored, each interaction documented. Chen's biofeedback system provided objective evidence of progress. Atlas's stress responses were decreasing. His tolerance for human proximity was increasing. His aggression incidence, zero. Other handlers began requesting training in the techniques. Monroe organized a formal workshop. Hastings created training manuals. Even Ambrose, who'd maintained his distance, started attending observation sessions. The program was working, but success brought new challenges. Word had spread beyond the facility. Other bases started requesting information. Command wanted to know if the protocols could scale. Media inquiries started coming in. The ghost handler story, combined with revolutionary K9 rehabilitation methods, made for compelling headlines. Colonel Rhodes called a meeting. "Warrant officer, we have a situation. Good news and complicated news. The good news is your 6-month pilot program is being extended. Command wants to see results through a full year. They're impressed with Atlas's progress and the data Dr. Chen's been collecting. And the complicated news, ma'am. They want to go public, not just military reports, actual media coverage. Feature stories about the program, about you, about combat K9 rehabilitation. They think it's good publicity for military working dogs." Hazel felt her chest tighten. "I'd prefer to avoid publicity, ma'am. The work matters more than the story." "I understand, but you're not just a handler anymore. You're the face of a program that could change policy. That comes with visibility. The question is whether you're willing to accept that." Duke, sitting beside her chair, leaned against her leg. Solid, grounding. "If publicity helps more dogs get proper treatment," Hazel said carefully, "then I'll do it. But I want control over messaging. No sensationalism. No ghost handler mythology. Just facts about trauma-informed K9 rehabilitation." "Agreed. I'll have public affairs coordinate with you directly. You approve every interview, every photo, every story." 2 months later, Hazel stood in front of a camera crew filming a feature for a military news network. Atlas sat calmly at her side, wearing his biofeedback monitoring vest. The dog that everyone had written off as unrehabilitatable was now the program's star success story. The reporter, a veteran herself, asked thoughtful questions about trauma, recovery, and the bond between handlers and their K9 partners. Hazel answered honestly. No exaggeration, no drama, just truth about what worked and why it mattered. The feature aired 3 weeks later. Response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails from handlers across the military asking for training. Requests from veteran organizations wanting to implement similar programs for civilian working dogs. Even congressional inquiries about expanding funding for K9 rehabilitation. Sterling found Hazel in the training facility one evening. "You've started something bigger than you realize, warrant officer. This isn't just about dogs anymore. It's about changing how the military thinks about all combat trauma, human and animal." "That wasn't the goal, Sergeant Major." "Best things rarely are. But now that you've got everyone's attention, what are you going to do with it?" Hazel looked around the facility. At Hastings working with Ranger. At Monroe conducting a handler workshop. At Atlas peacefully resting in his enclosure. At Duke, always Duke, watching everything with those wise, patient eyes. "I'm going to keep doing the work," she said simply. "Everything else is just noise." But that night, alone in her quarters, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She'd come back for Duke, to save one dog, to prove one point. And somehow that small act of defiance had become a movement. The ghost handler had finally been caught. But instead of ending, her real mission was just beginning. What does legacy look like when you're still building it? Hazel sat in the conference room at the Pentagon, Duke at her side, facing a panel of generals and senior officials. 1 year had passed since the pilot program began. 12 months of data, documented successes, measured outcomes. And now, the moment that would determine whether everything she'd fought for would become permanent policy or just another failed experiment. General Vaughn, a three-star with a reputation for brutally honest assessments, opened the review. Warrant Officer Martinez, we've examined your program results. 63 combat traumatized K-9s enrolled. 49 successfully rehabilitated and returned to operational status. 8 in ongoing treatment. 6 retired to civilian life without behavioral euthanasia. 0 permanent failures. He paused, letting the numbers settle. That's a 78% operational recovery rate. Our previous approach averaged 12%. You've improved outcomes by 650%. Explain how. Hazel had prepared for this. Months of documentation, endless reports, but she knew they didn't want data. They wanted understanding. Sir, the traditional approach treated combat trauma as a training failure. Dogs that developed anxiety, hypervigilance, or aggression were labeled as broken and discarded. My approach recognizes combat trauma as an injury, not a failure. These dogs aren't broken. They're wounded. And with proper treatment, most can heal enough to return to meaningful work. One of the generals, a skeptic judging by his expression, spoke up. But meaningful work doing what, warrant officer? These dogs have been through hell. Are you suggesting we send them back into combat zones? Some of them, yes, sir. If they're cleared by veterinary behaviorists and their handlers are properly trained in trauma-informed techniques. But operational work isn't just combat. Detection dogs for base security, search and rescue, training roles where they help prepare younger K-9s. These veterans have skills and experience that remain valuable. And the ones who can't return to operational status. Retirement with dignity, sir. Adoption by their handlers or carefully screened families. But retirement without the behavioral issues that previously required euthanasia. That alone saves lives and honors their service. Colonel Rhodes leaned forward. Let's address the elephant in the room. Cost. Your program requires specialized equipment, trained behaviorists, extended rehabilitation timelines. Traditional approach is cheaper in the short term. Retire and replace. Why should we invest in rehabilitation when replacement is easier? Hazel had expected this question. Because, ma'am, these aren't equipment, they're partners, warriors. They've saved American lives, multiple times in most cases. Duke alone saved my life 11 times in combat. Atlas saved 13 soldiers before developing trauma. Retiring them early because we won't invest in their care sends a message to every handler in the military. Your partner is disposable. Your bond means nothing. That message destroys morale and effectiveness. She pulled up data on her tablet. But if moral arguments aren't sufficient, here are financial numbers. Training a K-9 from puppy to operational readiness costs approximately $40,000 and takes 18 months. Rehabilitating a combat veteran costs $12,000 and takes 6 months on average. We're not just saving dogs. We're saving money and maintaining experienced working animals. General Vaughn exchanged glances with Rhodes. You make compelling points, warrant officer, but implementation at scale is complex. We're talking about hundreds of facilities, thousands of handlers, complete protocol overhaul. Which is why I've proposed a phased approach, sir. Start with installations that have the highest concentration of combat traumatized K-9s. Establish rehabilitation centers with properly trained staff. Create a certification program for handlers. Measure outcomes rigorously. Expand based on success rates. Don't overhaul everything overnight. Build systematically. The skeptical general spoke again. And who oversees this expansion? You. One warrant officer managing a military-wide policy change. No, sir. That would be unrealistic. I've identified 12 handlers across the military with the aptitude and dedication to become program leaders. They've all completed intensive training in trauma-informed techniques. They're ready to establish regional centers. I'd provide oversight and quality control, but the program needs distributed leadership to scale effectively. Vaughn nodded slowly. You've thought this through. I've had 12 months to think of little else, sir. The panel asked more questions, technical details about specific protocols, statistical breakdowns of success rates by dog breed, trauma type, deployment history. Hazel answered everything with precision, backed by data Dr. Chen had helped compile. Finally, after 2 hours, Vaughn called for a recess. The panel members left to deliberate. Hazel remained in the conference room, Duke resting his head on her lap. We did our best, buddy, she whispered. Whatever they decide, we did our best. 30 minutes later, the panel returned. Vaughn stood at the head of the table. Warrant Officer Martinez, this panel has reached a decision. Your program has demonstrated exceptional results under controlled conditions. The question before us was whether those results justify systematic implementation across the military K-9 program. Hazel held her breath. Our decision is yes with conditions. We're authorizing Phase 2 expansion, 5 military installations, full funding and personnel support, 12-month evaluation period. If results continue matching your current success rates, we proceed to military-wide adoption. Relief flooded through her, but Vaughn wasn't finished. However, we're also promoting you to Chief Warrant Officer 2 and assigning you as Program Director. This isn't optional. You created this. You'll see it through. Questions? No, sir. Thank you, sir. As the panel members filed out, Rhodes lingered. Congratulations, Chief. You've changed military policy. That's no small achievement. It was never about achievement, ma'am. Just about doing right by the dogs. Which is exactly why you succeeded. People who do things for ego always fail eventually. People who do things for others build something that lasts. Outside the Pentagon, Hazel knelt beside Duke in the parking area. The dog looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much, but somehow retained the capacity for trust. We're not done yet, she told him. This is just the beginning. 8 months into Phase 2, Hazel stood in a training facility at Fort Bragg. The regional center she'd envisioned was now reality. Proper equipment, dedicated staff, handlers learning trauma-informed techniques with genuine commitment. Corporal Hastings had become the facility's lead instructor, teaching new handlers with competence and passion. His transformation from uncertain assistant to confident leader exemplified everything the program could achieve. Sergeant Monroe had transferred to Fort Bragg specifically to work in the program. The woman who'd once mocked Hazel now advocated fiercely for combat K-9 rehabilitation. Even Lieutenant Ambrose had come around. He'd requested assignment as tactical operations advisor, using his combat experience to help design realistic training scenarios that built dog confidence without triggering trauma. Dr. Chen had joined full-time, heading the veterinary behavioral research arm. Her biofeedback monitoring system was now standard equipment. Her data collection methods were being adopted across the military. And Atlas, the dog everyone said couldn't be saved, was now working with new handlers, demonstrating techniques, proving that recovery was possible. Hazel's phone buzzed, a text from General Vaughn. Phase 2 results are excellent. Check your email. Well done, Chief. She opened her email. The report was comprehensive. 5 facilities, 173 dogs enrolled, 136 successfully rehabilitated, 87% success rate, cost savings of over $4 million annually. Recommendation: proceed to military-wide adoption with immediate effect. Sterling approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Congratulations, you just changed military policy permanently. We changed it, Sergeant Major. This was never just me. No, but it started with you. One person willing to sacrifice everything for what was right. They stood together, watching Hastings work with a group of new handlers. Duke and Atlas rested nearby, the veteran teaching the newcomer. "What's next for you?" Sterling asked. Hazel looked at Duke, who'd lifted his head, sensing her attention. "We keep working, keep helping dogs heal, keep proving that warriors deserve better." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." That evening, alone in her quarters, Hazel's phone rang. Rhodes's voice came through clearly. "I hope I'm not calling too late, Chief." "Not at all, ma'am. What can I do for you?" "There's a situation developing. Teams of handlers in Germany. Dogs coming back from classified operations with severe trauma. They've requested your consultation specifically. 2-week assignment. Full authority to implement your protocols." Hazel looked at Duke, who was watching her with intelligent eyes. "When do they need us?" "Flight leaves tomorrow at 0600. I'll have orders waiting." "We'll be there, ma'am." "I knew you would be. One more thing, Chief. The handlers requesting you specifically asked for the ghost handler who saved her dog by breaking all the rules. They said anyone willing to sacrifice career and reputation to do what's right is exactly the kind of person they want training their teams." After the call ended, Hazel packed methodically. Gear for Duke, training equipment, documentation for protocols. As she worked, she thought about the journey from that first day on the range, when Duke had frozen and everyone had assumed failure, to this moment, preparing to help warriors worldwide. Her phone buzzed with messages. Hastings wishing her safe travels. Dr. Chen sending updated medical files. Sterling telling her to make them proud again. And one from an unknown number. A handler she'd trained months ago, thanking her for changing everything. Hazel set down her phone and moved to where Duke slept. She knelt beside him. The dog opened one eye, tail wagging slowly. "Ready for another mission, buddy?" Duke stood stretched, moved to the door with purpose. "Ready, always ready." Because some warriors never stop serving. They just find new ways to fight, new battles worth winning, new lives worth saving. Hazel Donovan, the ghost handler who became real, walked out into the night toward whatever came next. Behind her, a program transformed. Ahead, warriors waiting for hope. And beside her, always beside her, the partner who'd survived war, trauma, revelation, and triumph. The bond that defined them both, the loyalty that sustained them, the purpose that gave meaning to every sacrifice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And sometimes, the greatest acts of service happen quietly, without fanfare, carried out by those willing to break rules, challenge systems, and sacrifice comfort for what's right. Because saving one life, whether human or animal, is never just about that one life. It's about proving that everyone deserves a second chance. That wounds can heal. That trauma doesn't define worth. And that the measure of a warrior isn't whether they never fall, but whether they rise again, stronger and wiser, ready to help others do the same. Hazel and Duke stepped into the darkness, carrying forward the weight of reputation and the lightness of purpose, knowing their mission would never truly end. Because warriors like them don't retire. They just find new ways to serve.